Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. This is your host, Amina Ahmed, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Welcome back to another episode of NextGen. On this week's theme of youth who are making impacts and changing policy at the ground level. We spoke for the past 2 weeks on the humanitarian level at a global level, but this week we just want to take it back to the groundwork that is being done by young people. And today we also have a very special guest, which I'll speak about a little bit later. But we're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. Now, the issue we'll be speaking on today is climate change. Climate change has impacted all of us, right? Whether it be young people, the older generation, it's impacting our planet. But this issue is one that is very significant because not only does it impact us today, it impacts the generations that come after us, their livelihood and well-being as well. Climate change has significant impacts on our economies, our ecosystems, our communities. For instance, at the beginning of this year, we saw the Australian wildfires, which, although have died down, there's still heat waves that are impacting just the Australian community, but also they've sparked dialogue on what climate change is and global warming as well. But as our planet continues to change, right, and the issue of how homeostasis will be developed, that arises as well. But hopefully we are all developing, we're adjusting, and we're sparking dialogues on what climate change is and global warming. We're also hoping to fight for a better world, for a restored world where these issues aren't ignored, where some people don't even realize and acknowledge that climate change is an issue. And I think that's one of the most ironic ironies that come out of all of this, is that some don't even acknowledge the existence of one of the main issues that we face in our world, not just as young people, but as communities as a whole. And in order to discuss more about climate change and its impacts on our world and the work that's being done by youth, we have with us Adelina Avalos.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hey, Adelina, thank you for being with us today. No, it's an absolute honor. Adelina, you are from the southeast side of Chicago, and for the past 2 years, you have been very involved in the climate and environment scene. Adelina has organized 5 climate strikes. That's absolutely insane. That's phenomenal. 5. You've organized all 5 of those. You are headed to the University of Illinois and hope to graduate from there and continue to organize in the city of Chicago. You've also affected policies with environmental racism and job acts, that come from all of the issues of climate change. So you're there affecting policy. You're there on the ground, making some impacts, making some changes. Thank you, Lena, for being with us.
No, thank you.
Yeah, and before we get more into climate change and global warming, I want you to tell us more about yourself, right? And what inspired your journey into what, this process right now that you're in?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I wanted to clarify that it wasn't just me organizing, it was definitely a team. I'm sure you knew that, but I think a big part is just, one, where I grew up here on the southeast side. We have a lot of factories, pollution, and it's also just, it really goes into the environmental racism conversation, which I think we can circle back to in a little bit. But so I think that's one big thing for me, and also just how environmentalism has affected my family personally. Like my grandmother, she grew up working on the fields in Texas, and then she got like a very bad liver disease and all that, just because she worked with all the pesticides and all the pollution and all that happening down there in Texas. And then just growing up here, miles and miles away from where that was, and still feeling the same effects of pollution, of just in the environment, definitely sparks like this drive in me. And then also just generally, like, there's no action being taken by this country about climate change. And not only is there not action being taken, there's like you said, there's a debate on if it even exists. Like there's a lot of other things we should be debating, and climate change is not one of them.
Wow, you said there's a lot of things we should be debating, and climate change is not one of them. Definitely. You think our current administration is one of the reasons we're not seeing a lot of change being, taken because of climate change, or is this something that's been, seen in the history of our country?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think definitely, I don't think this administration is at fault for climate change or anything, or if they're the reason that climate action isn't being taken right now. Because one, we had early 2000s, we had Bush, who definitely was not for climate the way Al Gore was. Then we had Obama, who took climate action, but definitely not as much as that's necessary. And then now we have President Trump, who doesn't even acknowledge that climate change exists. And I definitely think that harms one, because he has that harms this climate change fight, because one, he has the opportunity to choose who's in the EPA, and the EPA has an insane effect on polluters, restrictions, regulations, everything around oil, gas, nuclear, you name it. EPA has the power to either change or regulate that. And two, also just spewing this whole idea to his followers that climate change isn't real, and that, this is some liberal leftist ploy, and, they're just lying to you and all that. It's ridiculous. I think there's so many things wrong with this administration that I can go into, but I think that's definitely a big one, because it's one thing to just be passive about climate change. It's another thing to totally just be against people wanting a livable future.
Why do you think that, where does that come from, right? That notion that climate change does not exist, that, like you said, is a leftist liberal agenda. Where does that even come from?
I think a big part of it is that it's hard to. So I read this book called "This Changes Everything" by Naomi Klein, which is a very good read. I'd suggest reading that. But a lot of it comes from this idea that it's really hard to picture a world where, actually, I guess it's not that hard to picture a world right now where you have to wear a face mask every time you go out because of the pollution, or where you can't be outside for X amount of hours, or you have to, all these, you can't have trees, you can't have this, and you have to, meat can't be made anymore. It has to be grown in a factory and stuff like that. It's hard to think about. It's super hard to realize that if we don't take immediate action, 10, 20, 40 years from now, the world is going to be nowhere the way we see it right now. And with that comes this cognitive dissonance that, if I pretend this isn't real, I pretend, this isn't going to happen, it won't, because it's hard to think about. It's something that's impossible to wrap your mind around. I can barely wrap my mind around it, and I spend my life dedicated to this work,
Yeah.
So I definitely think that's a big part of why climate change denial exists. And aside from that, also, it's just super easy to put environmentalists into a box of environmentalists are some weird hippie tree huggers who, wear Birkenstocks. I love my Birkenstocks, but not the point. Who just wear Birkenstocks and metal straws and veganism. Well, that's all great, and I participate in all that. It's easy to just be like, oh, look at these liberals who want to take away my pickup truck, which is not the case, but it's easy to fire that.
Yeah. Do you think, you spoke a little bit about COVID and how the reality of, wearing masks outside every single day due to pollution and all of that, but just circling back to that discussion of COVID-19, do you think that we're seeing, the climate being, just looking better just from ourselves because of COVID-19, because people aren't out there polluting it as much? Tell us a little bit about that.
So yes and no. So yes, we've seen a drastic decline in carbon emissions, which can never be a bad thing for our planet. But also, I think this adds to the idea of, so within environmentalism, there's a lot of different branching ideas that a lot of people don't, if you're not actively participating and studying it, you don't really see. So there's this route of climate action versus environmental justice. So climate action is very all means necessary, carbon emissions down, save the planet, which is yes, but also thinking about the cost of that. So sure, we have carbon emissions down, but look at our economy, look at who's suffering, look at the essential workers, look at, doctor, you know what I mean? The world is not really good right now, especially because of Corona. But, is it worth it to have these carbon emissions decline? I personally don't think so. And which is why I go down my route of environmental justice thinking, which is more let's put people first, let's make green jobs, let's keep the economy alive, and also let's make sure that we have obviously systemic issues of racism, classism, misogyny, homophobia that are just in our society. And when we think about climate action, we don't want to contribute to that. We don't want to do, carbon taxes as simple as an idea that is, and as like, oh, that has to work because people are going to buy less gas. Not the case, right? Because say we have a carbon tax, who's going to benefit? The rich people who are just going to say, oh, I can afford that. I can drive wherever I want. Who's gonna experience a loss from that is going to be poor people who have to drive to work, who don't have accessible transportation like buses, trains. Let's say I have to drive to work and now I have to pay this extra carbon tax, even though, I really have no say over what's happening. And that goes so take again, like I live in the Southeast side, which has its own issues with factories and all that. But also we don't have a CTA train out here. We have a metro train that is like double the cost of CTA train. We have a few buses that can get you from point A to point B, but not efficiently, not nearly as fast enough as it should be. So yeah, I think that these are very different ideologies of environmental thinking, and I don't like the idea of people being like, oh well, corona, it's really gonna help the environment, which, because it's not. It has disproportionately affect Black and brown people, poor people, things like that. So yeah, I think that's my thoughts right now on where environmentalism is.
So do you think that a lot of that comes from a position of privilege, right, where people are just like, by all means necessary? Do we have a specific type of people saying those type of things, right? Because I'm pretty sure it's not essential workers, it's not poor who will be affected, drastically by those type of means. Why is it that we're seeing, if we're seeing those in privilege have those type of notions?
Yeah, so I definitely think there's a definite issue of privilege within environmentalism, because you see a lot of privileged, wealthy white folks be like, oh, you're not shopping sustainably? Well, you're hurting the planet, which is true, but look at the cost of buying from Shein or Forever 21 or whatever else horrible like fast fashion company. It's like $6 for a shirt versus shopping sustainably where it's like $40 for a shirt. Is the price worth it? Probably. But if you can't afford that, that's not an option on the table, and I definitely hate seeing things like, well, you're not shopping sustainably. Also, the whole thing of like, you're not going vegan. Going vegan is amazing and so beneficial for the planet, but not accessible to everyone. Also, just culturally, like, I mean, me living in like a Mexican American household, like, we eat like red meat like pretty often. We, like a lot of dairy, a lot of like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just part of my culture and how I eat. So yeah, I think that's a lot of notion around that of like, well, you need to be going vegan, you need to be shopping sustainable. Well, that's great if you have the opportunity, but not everyone does not have the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think the younger generation is fighting harder for this cause? Or is there a divide, right, between the older generation and the younger generation with climate activism?
Yeah, I definitely think the younger generation, at least the people I've been working with, talking with, this isn't necessarily just a fight about environment. This is a fight against, against capitalism, against the horrible systems in the world that put us in this problem in the first place. If we lived in a world where the government just was not a bunch of politicians, fighting for their own financial or political or powerful gain, we wouldn't necessarily be in this crisis that we are right now. If ExxonMobil had talked about climate change crisis when they found out about it in the 1980s, we would not be in this issue that we're in right now. And at the root of it, at the root of climate change, at the root of environmental injustices, it comes down to greed, it comes down to extractivism, and it comes down to people not caring about others. And there needs to be accountability in that. And yeah.
And we'll be speaking more on the work that's being done by Lena, as well as, like she said, there's so many others with her, so many young, inspiring, activists with her. And we'll be speaking more about that right after our short break. We're there on Galaxy 19 Satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, and Roku. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with Adelina Avalos, a young climate activist. Now, Lena, can you tell us about the Illinois Youth Climate Strike and, your position in that strike?
Yeah, definitely. So the Illinois Youth Climate Strike, Illinois Youth Climate Movement, we are a group of teens, and I actually am the oldest in the thing, so that says a lot about how young we are. We range from 8th grade all the way to senior year or freshman year in college now. So we have been working for about a year and a half, 2 years now, basically just putting on these climate strikes, calling for environmental justice, against environmental racism in Chicago, and just general climate action, because that is the bare minimum, just at least something to be happening, and that is just not happening. So this started, March 2018, 2019, I don't know. It started one in March, so we had one in March, which came out with about 500 people, another one in May with about 700 people. And then that was amazing. We thought, oh my God, this is the peak of activism. This is amazing. And, we thought that that was amazing. That was an amazing turnout. It was definitely fighting for environmental justice and not climate action like I talked about earlier. And then come last September, so we're talking and we're like, oh my God, we need to have at least 1,000 people. That would be amazing. Or 700 people. That'd be insane. It would really get our point across. Then I don't really know what happened, but we ended up outreaching so much that we had 8,000, 10,000 people coming, and it was just an insane day. Probably one of the best days of my life. And we got direct attention from Governor Pritzker for him to take action on the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and I think that was super powerful. And then we had another one in December and October, and with a good turnout as well. And we were supposed to have one on Earth Day. Obviously, that didn't happen. And we ended up having a live stream similar to this one on our Instagram. So we have been working tirelessly to do these strikes, and also just promoting Clean Energy Jobs Act, which is which I can get into later, but it's basically an environmental justice bill here in Illinois. And I think our team has been amazing. We actually have new members just joined us last month, because we have seniors that are graduating. I'm personally staying in the chapter just because I'm going to be in Illinois. But had I gone to college somewhere else, I would have had to leave. But
Lena, I think I would want to join too. I want to be a new member, because that's phenomenal, right? Where you said you have from 8th grade all the way to freshman year in college, young people who care about the environment, who care about not only themselves, but the generations that will come after them. But can you tell us more about this act and how, you've been able to affect policy by advocacy?
Yeah, so the Clean Energy Jobs Act is an act currently still up for approval in the Illinois House and Senate. So essentially, Clean Energy Jobs Act, also called CEJA, and I'm going to keep calling it that because it's easier. So CEJA is an environmentally justice-based bill that will promote clean energy. So wind, solar, whatever you think of, it's what's going to be promoted. It's going to not only shut down any coal or any hazardous factories, but once those factories get shut down, they get fined. They actually get some accountability. The workers there, that's not their fault that they work at a coal factory or at any factory. We can't just leave them behind. That is a route that, that's that climate action route I'm talking about. But we would go this environmental justice route where, okay, so you're working at a coal factory. We don't want this coal factory to happen. So we're going to give you free job training and free job opportunities. And you're going to be able to work in solar and wind and whatever other green opportunities come up. And that's so important. And it'll also not only stimulate our economy, but it will also just lessen that gap between Black and brown folks working and, wealthy white folks being at the top of the line, being like, okay, I'm making all this money. You can go work in this hazardous factory and kind of do it for me.
Yeah. And, what are some other ways that you and your group have been able to raise awareness and continue to advocate, aside from these protests and strikes? Tell us some other methods.
Yeah, so we've had live streams on our platform before. We also always promote anything that's happening. So say, there's a I don't know, there's a podcast recording happening, we would definitely, if someone reached out to us and said, hey, this is happening in my neighborhood, we're talking about XYZ, can you promote it? And if it fits with our ideas around climate change, we'll definitely promote it. We also make sure to highlight that Indigenous, Black, and Latino folks, we're at the front lines of this fight, and most of the time we're not the ones being uplifted, not the ones being centered, which is fine. Well, it's not fine, but that's not the priority isn't for attention or all that. But at the end of the day, you should get it when you deserve it. So working with the Illinois Indigenous Youth Council, Good Kids Mad City, and other amazing Black and Brown Indigenous organizations here in Chicago, and making sure that we team up with them and that we take their thoughts, their ideas, and we uplift them in our strikes. Because at the end of the day, we don't want our strikes just being a bunch of kids from Naperville and from Chicago and from wherever else, and saying we want climate action, because we do, but we also want to make sure that it's for Black, Brown, Indigenous, queer, femme, any folks because everyone deserves to live in a safe, healthy home, and we want to make sure that happens.
Yeah, and I think it's beautiful how you constantly highlight that this is not just a fight from the privileged, white folk. This is a fight for people who are Indigenous, who are Black and Brown, who are from poorer communities. But can we talk about that divide? Why does that even exist, right? With Greta Thunberg, for instance, she's very inspiring and empowering, and I love the work that she does. But the reality is there's so many Indigenous folks who have been doing that work for decades, but they haven't been given that same platform. Why is it that we're seeing this currently?
I think there's a lot of different reasons. One, I think making activism more palatable for folks, and being like, oh, look at Greta Thunberg, she's doing it peacefully. She is, and she's amazing, inspiring, and obviously deserves all the recognition she gets. But at that point, they're like, so yes, she's doing amazing work and inspiring real climate action and real discussion. But also we have to think about the folks who protested at the Dakota Access Pipeline, and the folks who are protesting in Canada, and all the Indigenous and Black folks protesting all across, not even just this nation, all across the world against climate change. Because at the end of the day, Black and Brown Indigenous folks are bearing the brunt of climate change, and that's environmental racism. I know Latino folks, we breathe in about 63% more pollution than we cause. Meanwhile, white folks, they breathe in about, I think it's something like 27% less pollution than what they cause. And it's just a very clear and very brutal divide. And you see that happening. So making activism more palatable for folks, and also just it's easy for people to look at Black and Brown women specifically, Black, Brown, Indigenous women, and being like, oh, she's just angry. She's just aggressive. She's just this. She's just that. Because, I am angry personally. Yeah. But, it's super easy to just be like, oh, another angry Black and Brown woman. Oh, another one of these. And just kind of brush it off to the side, when that's not the case. And even if we are angry, and we are, okay, you should listen and take action about it.
Exactly. And with Greta, she was angry, but she got a lot of praise for it. Whereas if a Black or Brown woman did the same exact thing, she would be labeled, as you said, right? So it's just that divide. Why is it that when we see a white woman who's angry, we label her as passionate? But then if we see that same thing, with Black or Brown folks, it's a totally different story.
Oh, yeah. So, we see the same thing. It's, oh, they're bossy, they're angry, they're aggressive, they're, whatever. But then as soon as a white girl does it, says the same thing. It's, oh my God, she's a girl boss. She's so powerful, blah, blah, blah. And we all are. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you bring that up, because it's a conversation that we need to have. But Lena, can we talk about environmental justice in the context of this whole movement, right? And I know that environmental justice is not something that is at the forefront. It's not something that most folks are even speaking on. So tell us about environmental justice.
Yeah, so environmental justice goes directly against environmental racism. So environmental racism is just like I said earlier, Black and Brown folks, Black, Brown, Indigenous folks are always the ones breathing in more pollution. They're the ones being affected. They're the ones having dirty water, having, unlivable conditions, and they are not the ones causing this. And it is that it's greedy companies being like, oh, we can move our factory there and no one's going to care. We can do this. We can dump this toxic polluter there and no one's going to care, because Black and brown communities have been historically neglected by government. You know, you look at redlining, you look at anything else happen. Like, this is just, it was set up this way, and people are continuing to take advantage of it, because at the end of the day, if there is a polluter in, this is what's happened right now here in Chicago. There was a polluter in Lincoln Park, a very wealthy, affluent, white neighborhood, and they were kicked out. They said, this isn't good. This is not good for people, not good for anyone in this neighborhood. And true, they should be kicked out. So then come General Iron, we're going to move to the southeast side of Chicago where Black and brown folks live. This is where I live. And they got their permit approved, got it approved by Mayor Lightfoot, and they're breaking ground. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool. So they know that our government is not going to pay attention to this neighborhood. They know they're not going to do anything about it. And that's what's happening. And that's what environmental racism is. And environmental justice goes exactly against that. It goes that we need to take climate action, and we need to put these communities first and foremost. Anyone who's already suffering with higher cancer rates, with asthma, with anything else caused directly by pollution, dirty water, lead pipes, anything else like that, they need to be put first and foremost. We need to fix those. We need to fix that issue. We need to give reparations, in a sense, back. We need to give them job opportunities, job trainings, anything else. And then once we do that, and once we have this clean energy, once we have these communities thriving again, we can then move on to, okay, what's a giant broader thing that we can end climate action with, that we can, how do we get 100% electric vehicles, or green spaces throughout downtown Chicago, or, any of that giant visionary stuff comes next to the people first.
Yeah, and that's absolutely phenomenal. The fact that you're taking into consideration the most vulnerable, and then we look at the bigger picture, because obviously it is our communities that matter the most, who are, like you said, neglected by the government. But our politicians, right, the mass majority of politicians, are they taking an affirmative stance on this issue?
Some not. We have some amazing Democratic freshmen here in Chicago that are taking an amazing stance. So we have Marie Newman, who's about to be a congresswoman. She's taken an insane stance on environmental justice. Robert Peters, a state senator here in Illinois, who has done amazing work around environmental justice and things like that. But at the end of the day, people are scared to say that, politicians are scared to say, we need to do radical climate action, and we need to put Black people first. Because if they are supporting climate change, it's very like, we need to have a carbon tax. We need to, once again, a more like palatable way for people to deal with it, when that's not what we need right now. What we need is what I just said earlier. We need environmental justice. We need to be working with folks like Good Kids Bad City, who is just an amazing organization here in Chicago. Right now, they're working around defunding the police, Black Lives Matter movement, and abolishing the police. And it's a super important fight. And that's why I personally and our organization supports them a lot, because once we defund the police, once we abolish the police, and we have this amazing, we have all this money that can go into mental health, and we can go into schools, it can go into God knows whatever else. It can also go into climate, and also go into environment, and we can get these clean energy jobs, we can get these solar jobs, wind jobs, we can get like your heart's desire, you can get trains, and I don't even know, like forest preserves and stuff, and beautiful things that can come out of this budget, out of a system that is made to hurt Black and brown folks. It's made to disproportionately put Black and brown folks in jail for doing nothing, and brutally killing Black and brown folks for no reason besides the fact that that's what the system was created to do, and we need to get rid of that.
Leah, you speak about the environmental fight and how it's closely connected to our fight for racial equality in this country. And I think that's very beautiful how you describe both of those as so interconnected, because they truly just are. And we'll be speaking more on what you can do, what our audience can do to get involved, just like Lena and her team does, right after our short break. You're watching us on NextGen, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with Adelina Avalos, and we're speaking on the climate change movement and young activists who are fighting for a better and safer world. Now, Lena, can you tell us about how other young activists can get involved, similar to how you did? What can they do to impact our world?
Definitely. It's not hard to do. We want all the help. I'm sure you can attest to this too. We want all the help we can get. If you reach out to me, to my organization at Illinois Youth Climate Movement on Instagram, just a little plug right there. If you reach out to us, all you have to do is seriously just a DM. And I promise you, any activists, or at least any activist I know, would love your help. They would give you resources so you can educate yourself, provide information for training around abolitionist or environmental justice, organizing. Trainings are happening all the time, and you can definitely go learn, educate yourself, and how to effect a real change and how to do that on your own. Also, it's just little things too, like promoting protests, promoting things like conversations that are happening like this, like retweeting Muslim TV on Twitter and retweeting Good Kids Red City on Twitter or Sierra Club or whatever else, and just educating your family members. I think it's really important too, like having those difficult conversations. It's hard to talk to your parents about why prisons shouldn't exist or why why we need to get rid of all fossil fuel energy no matter what. Stuff like that. Those are hard conversations and they need to be had. I think that's a super easy way for you to grow as an activist and also just become an activist in general. I think activist is a heavy word, and I think I even struggled using it on myself because I'm like, ooh, am I really an activist? I don't know. I'm just kind of talking, stuff like that. It's not hard to do. Just DM, ask, do whatever you want. And get involved.
Yeah, and you spoke about how a lot of these conversations are difficult to have. And indeed, they are difficult to have because sometimes you're labeled, a radical, you're labeled this and that by sometimes even people close to you. But I always say that all of those who've made change in our past, we see with Martin Luther King Jr. just in the civil rights movement not too long ago, he was also labeled a radical then, and it's years later that people tend to acknowledge and appreciate the work that's being done. So I think that the younger generation has been accustomed to that label, and sometimes we even take pride in the fact that we want change and we want it immediately, and we want it also for the generations that come after us. So Lena, what is your message to people who don't even believe in climate change, who don't believe that it exists? I want to know what you have to say to them.
It's a heavy thing. Look around you. I mean, think about 5 years ago, and was it raining in the middle of July in Chicago like it is right now? Were you having polar vortexes every winter? You can see it clear as bright as day that the climate is changing, and you can feel it. And just because you don't want to acknowledge it doesn't mean it's not true. Same thing goes for drive to the southeast side, drive here to Indiana and the northwest Indiana. You'll see the factories, you'll see the pollution, you'll see the smoke, you'll smell how disgusting it smells because, who cares? Just, some black and brown folks down here. You can see it. And I think if you're still denying that climate change exists, that you're lying to yourself and you know it. And you need to really check yourself because this is a conversation that I don't even want to be having as an activist, as an organizer, as just me living on the southeast side. There are other conversations. I'd rather be having conversations around environmental justice like we just did, or environmental racism, other stuff. I should not be having discussions on, is climate change real? Yes, it is. Let's go.
Right. And the reason you're so passionate about it is because it affects you, it affects your communities. And then you have people outside of that community being like, no, it just doesn't exist. So I understand why that, can just be so, it's something to get angry about, the fact that we even have to have these conversations in the first place. But Lena, you have just graduated high school, right? Let's bring this discussion back to you. You're 18 years old and now you're headed to college, right? How do you plan to continue this movement, to continue advocating even in college?
Yeah, so, one, I'm going to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which is by Springfield. So I will be, not by Springfield, closer to Springfield than Chicago is. I will definitely be trying my best to go down there whenever necessary and lobby for Clean Energy CEJA, Clean Energy Jobs Act, or whatever else is happening in the next 4 years. Also, I definitely want to get involved with clubs down there. I've already made some connections about trying to just become the organizer I am right now here in Southeast Side and bring that to the University of Illinois. Things like getting University of Illinois' endowment out of fossil fuels, or making sure that we're sustainable as a campus, as much as we can be. And yeah, I think I definitely want to carry that with me, and then I want to come back here home to Chicago and pour my all into it and really just fix not me, but like us as environmentalists, as just activists in general, really fix the issues that are happening.
Yeah. And, for us, for the audience, what are smaller things we can do to reduce our carbon footprint, to be more aware of the surroundings and just our climate, to be better, right, citizens of the world? What are some things that we can do?
Oh, yeah. So one, I definitely think educating yourself first and foremost. Reading books like This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate by Naomi Klein. Reading Grass Grows Longer, reading Climate Change from the Streets, things like that. It's like reading these books will really, one, change your mindset if it hasn't been changed already. Two, it will definitely just let you become more aware of what's happening when you have these discussions. And I think that's the most important. And then also little things, like I'm sure you've heard it already, using metal straws, eating less red meat, eating, shopping sustainably, thrift shopping, instead of shopping at Shein or Romwe or Forever 21 or whatever other company. And yeah, I definitely think there's so many. Taking the train, riding your bike, turning off the water when you brush your teeth, things like that. I definitely think, they may seem like small things, but they really do make a change. And I try my best to do as many as I can. Yeah.
And yeah, Lena, you just gave us, a list of things. And I think that these are just smaller things that a lot of us, if we can afford to do so, should be taking into consideration and doing it in our everyday life, encouraging our families to do so as well. But bringing it back to the bigger picture, Lena, what do you hope ideally is the outcome of the activism that you're doing just in the next couple of years? Because I know that this is a fight that, we might not even see the results of it in our lifetime, but just in the next couple of years, what are the outcomes of this?
I think ideally I would see, one, my community get rid of all these factories and all these horrible things happening. I think that could be definitely done within the next 5 years. I think that is possible. I also think that within the next 5 years, we can start beginning to transition people out of dirty jobs into clean jobs. So this looks like job hubs, or maybe even, I also think within the next 5 years, there can be like urban farming happening. Like, I think this is a super attainable thing, and shipping your avocados from like California it's bad for the climate. Like it really is. And I think if we grow these like avocados, for example, here in Chicago, that can change a lot. And I think it's possible. And I also think it's better for the community, like having this happening in your community and giving your money straight back to your community. Yeah, I think it's super important. Like, that's why you see farmers markets happening, and also go to farmers markets when they're in season, because they're super good for not only the community but for the earth, which is the best.
Yeah, and Lena, before we end here, right, you've given so many solutions that people can implement in their daily lives. But I want to know your final message to young people out there who are watching. What is your final message to them and their kind of path of getting involved?
So much. Get him. Just reach out. Like it says, visit thepeopleslobbyusa.org. That's an organization I interned for this summer, and just doing things like donating, not only just your like any money you have, if you have it, because a lot of people don't. Donate your time. Go to town halls, go to discussions like these, watch, educate yourself, and go to protests when it's safe for you to, and making sure that even if climate change isn't your fight, find your fight and make sure you fight for what's close to you, what's hitting home, and what's and find that and pour your all into it.
Yeah, Lena, you said to find your fight, and I think that's very.
Oh no.
powerful, educate and raise our voices. Lena, you are powerful. You're phenomenal, and the work you're doing is necessary. And thank you, for just speaking to us today, for discussing your fight and the fight of so many of those around you. It was an honor for us to have you. And to our audience, thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with a new episode, a new guest on those young people who are making changes on the ground. Thank you so much for watching, and assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.
Thank you.